And welcome back. Let's go ahead and look at a couple more examples with strings. Let's go ahead and take this from a problem-solving approach. So in here we have a scenario where we want our program to take any dollar amount to display how many quarters are going to be dispensed. And for our purposes today, because we haven't talked about everything else that we would need to properly solve this, we're going to assume only valid whole dollar amounts are going to be entered. So the first thing we want to do, of course, is to get some input. And of course, once we have that input, we're probably going to want to store it into some type of variable. So we'll make a variable called quarters, and let's just set that equal to an input. But in this case, we want to make sure that input is converted to the proper type. So we're going to make sure it's an integer. So we have a whole number of quarters. We're not going to have pieces here. And we're going to do an input of please enter how many dollars you would like changed for quarters. Very simple prompt there. And then we're going to go ahead and convert this to quarters. Since we know that for every dollar, there's 4 quarters, it makes this operation pretty simple. So number of quarters. In fact, actually, I'm going to make this simple. Let's just go ahead and change this to dollars. And change this just to quarters. And we'll call this one dollars divided by 4. And then, of course, we want to probably display that out. And so we can just do print quarters. And let's actually add a little bit of a message in here. So this is going to be our strings coming into play here. And we can say the number of quarters available or to be dispensed are. And we'll do a concatenation, do a string cast here, because remember we have to do that. And I realized I put divide by 4 when I wanted to actually multiply that by 4. So let's just go ahead and give this a quick run to see what we get. And it says, how many dollars would you like exchanged? Let's go ahead and say we're going to put in $5. And we get 20, which makes sense. We should have 20 quarters for every $5. And so this is a very simple program and accomplishes what we needed to do. Now, the thing I want to point out here is that remember, we had to do a couple things here with our strings to go ahead and make sure things are working correctly. Remember, when we're working with strings, for example, when we do inputs like this, remember, input takes things in as a string. So whenever we want to get a variable that's not a string, don't forget to use the proper cast here. So we had, of course, cast that to an int. When we do our print statements, don't forget also if we have a variable that is not a string type, that we do a cast to a string. So we have to do string around it, and then we can concatenate that in with a string output. Now there are a bunch of other string methods that are available to us, and we've looked at those previously, seeing things like how we can find the length, how we can do a substring, how we can do to uppercase or to lowercase. And that's of course some things that we are going to use as we start working more and more with strings. Now if you notice in this scenario though, we didn't need to use all those things. And this is something we already know from our previous programming experience, is a lot of times we have this huge repertoire of things available to us, but we may only need a few things to solve the problem. And just so we can kind of get a recap, I'm just going to go ahead and create one more string here. So print, actually let's just create a variable and just call this a, how about statement of, or even, we'll just call this a line. There we go. That sounds good. Line equals a simple string. And then if we wanted to print, for example, the length of that string, I could then print out line. And if I were to run this, so let's put 20 in again, we would get 15. All right. So we get 20 quarters, we get, or $20, we get 80 quarters, and we of course get 15 for the length. Remember, if we have some other methods, they're going to be done a little differently. If I go ahead and put in line, I can, of course, bring up a whole bunch of different things that are available to me. You can see if I just do line dot, it brings up all these different things. So like line dot upper. If I go ahead and print that, let's do 5 again. We get a built-in method of string object. Oh, we forgot, of course, to finish this out properly. And of course, it was those open and close parentheses that I forgot here. I was just in a hurry. Let's go ahead and rerun this one more time. Put 5 in. And look, now we get a simple string in all caps. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. And again, these are things that are going to be really easy for us. And we're going to keep this in mind as we start making more and more complex programs here with Python, because Python is actually very straightforward in many of its approaches because it's meant to be a general purpose language. It's not necessarily supposed to tailor to one strength or another, but you can use it in different contexts.